Hello there, and welcome to another special episode of the Bible Believers Podcast. All right, well, guys, welcome to another episode of the Bible Believers Podcast, a Zoom episode. Greetings from Alcatraz. If I could put bars up, I would.
Yeah, good to see you. I've got bars behind me.
Uh-huh. What a crazy world we're living in.
It is indeed.
Well, we've got a special guest. One of our slogans here is "Three mouths just makes it louder." So we're without Joseph Horick at this point, and we've got a good friend of mine, Pastor Ed Luongo, on the show, and pertinent because Pastor Ed was a CFO of a medium to large company. How would we call it? Is that a big company?
About $1 billion.
About $1 billion. You know, it's peanuts.
Yeah.
Peanuts compared to the banking industry.
Big peanuts, but peanuts. But peanuts.
Right. So what we wanted to do with this episode is discuss some financial implications due to, I don't even know if I want to say due to COVID. I think COVID was the mechanism by which the movers and shakers are able to make things happen.
Sure.
But I wanted to ask a few questions of you while we have you on the air.
Sure, yes.
If we could, just recently I had somebody call me and ask if we're going to be dealing with an economic fallout of biblical proportions. Because there was something scrolling along Fox News down at the bottom, and it was talking about how the food supply chain has been interrupted here. And as long as the food supply chain is interrupted, then maybe a month or two down the line, we might be looking and going, hey, where's the pork on the shelves? Where's the beef on the shelves?
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious what you might think. Are we facing biblical proportions here in this economic crisis? Are we looking at something that's going to be coming towards us?
Well, in some respects, I think we are. I think that we're probably on the runway right now, and we're moving rapidly towards a time in the future where indeed, according to the Bible, there will be severe shortages of food and economic turmoil. And this certainly seems like we're on the runway moving towards it at rapid speed. That's my best estimation without putting any numbers to it at the moment. Mm-hmm. But so that's how I see it. Yeah, I think we are on our way.
And what about some biblical examples? Did we see? For me, every time I look to the Bible, there's always something historically that happened that maybe will work its way out prophetically in the future as well. And I'm just wondering if we have any examples from the Bible. Again, not only were you a CFO, but you were also a pastor and a Bible-believing one at that. So
yes,
I'm going to ask you.
Amen. Yeah, I think you're right. God always gives us a picture of something, whether we always see it or not. But I believe that God gave us a picture and a foreshadow of a time which is soon to come upon this world. And we know it as the Tribulation Period. And God gave us a picture. There was a great society from thousands of years ago, and the society is still around, though not to the same extent in its greatness, but that is Egypt. And in Egypt and the land during the time of some of the patriarchs, Joseph and in particular, it comes to mind, there was indeed, interestingly enough, a 7-year period of famine, mm-hmm. and all that famine brings with it. And so we know that in the Bible talks about a 7-year period called the tribulation, which is to come upon the earth, which will be far more than just a famine, but it will include the famine and things that famine brings with it, fear, panic, and desperation. And we have an example of that in the book of Genesis, chapter 47. If we want to turn to that, we've got a really good picture of the kinds of things we're seeing today and talking about and hearing in the news and on the headlines. And I do have a Bible here with me, fortunately. And if I look over at Genesis chapter 47, I'm going to put it down in front of me so I can see it.
Sure.
We have this, there was a king known as by the title Pharaoh, And in Joseph, who was one of the patriarchs of faith, it starts up in verse number 13 of chapter 47. This famine had been going on, and it says in verse number 13, and there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very sore, so that the land of Egypt and all the land of Canaan fainted by reason of the famine. Now it says there's no bread. It's talking about food. That's one of the
Sure.
Bible refers to as food, not just talking about bread. And so it's saying there was no bread. There was a shortage of food going on. And that is often one of the things that you see when you have the kind of thing we're seeing going on right now. Supply chains begin to back up. Pricing goes crazy. There's uncertainty. Manufacturers don't know how to process to what extent they need to process. So they may be laying off people. They may be trying to find more people, depending on what's going on in that particular business. I know in the milk industry, there's great turmoil right now with farmers here and there having too much milk because some of the demand outlets are down. They're not in existence anymore because of the shutdown.
Right.
So that causes milk to be dumped, thrown out, that type of thing. So, and then as you said, brother, there is talk now of meat shortages maybe in the pipeline for some of the same kinds of reasons. So it looks like we're in a time when, to some degree, the bread has begun to fail. And if you've gone to your local grocers in the last number of weeks, you found a number of things that weren't there that were always there.
Sure. Or at least are limited to us for our purchase.
That's right. And the Bible goes on, and interestingly, in verse number 15, which we'll get to maybe some other thoughts tonight, but it says in verse 15, and when the money failed in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came unto Joseph and said, give us bread, for why should we die in thy presence? For the money faileth. The money faileth. And what happened further, when the money began to fail, people could not provide for their cattle. They couldn't provide for themselves. And finally, you get to verse number 19, where it says, wherefore shall we die before thine eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread. And we and our land will be servants unto Pharaoh, and give us seed that we may live and not die, that the land be not desolate. So desperation set in, and finally the people said, buy us. We've got nothing else to give you.
Well, I remember a Bible verse, and I don't often go around quoting Satan, but skin for skin, all that a man hath will he give for his life.
Yeah, that's Book of Job. Yeah, that's the Book of Job, and that's very, very true. And Satan knows it, so he knows how to get to people. Just put them in some point. He holds people in that fear of bondage of death, according to Hebrews chapter 2. And that's what he does. It does, skin for skin. Yea, all that a man hath will he give for his own life.
Well, it sure looks like that's the direction that people are headed. That's something that Pastor Joe and I have talked about a number of times recently, just how willing people have been to give up their freedom in order to be protected by an invisible enemy. We don't even know if the enemy's real. I mean, I'm not one of those guys that says that obviously people are dying. I'm not going to deny that. But I think this is one of those cases where they have hyped the fear to where the fear is far more real than the virus itself.
Yeah, at this point. Go ahead, Brother Joe.
I was just saying, for the first time in a long time, I mean, I'm in the food industry as well, and I know you're in the dairy industry, but for the first time in a very long time, possibly, obviously, since the Depression, we're seeing people's, in this country, their flesh being affected. I can't buy 2 dozen eggs. I can only buy 1 dozen eggs or whatever it is. And Americans can't hack that. I mean,
no.
And they're so fearful, though, like Pastor Seth said, that for those eggs, sure, take my identity, do whatever you want with my social security number, healthcare, sure, whatever I need. And I have a story I'll save for later when we get to it, but people are willing and ready to just hand over their lives to the government and maybe to someone even more powerful.
Yeah, we see that, and some of it is because people, I'm turning over to 1 Timothy, people have been relying on money for so long as part of their security.
Right.
We live in a prosperous nation. Even those who are not particularly prosperous are still prosperous by the world's standards. And yet beyond that, I'm looking at 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse number 9, reading from the Bible says, "But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." The love of money. Now, there are those who are wealthy and they have a love for money, but I guarantee you there's people who are not that wealthy. They also have a love for money, and they rely and put their trust in that. And we've done that as a society. And we're beginning to see that you can have all the money you want, but if you can't buy food and you can't buy health, what good is it? The money fails.
Right.
Well, that's an argument that our current governor has been making. And I don't know that I always agree. You know, I think about what he's saying is basically, okay, here are your options, which aren't necessarily true, but your options are be impoverished or die.
Yeah.
It's like, thank you, Governor, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And he's saying, on one hand, well, of course we want to live, but what life are we looking at having here? What kind of life is this going to be?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, this is not what America is about. America is not about being locked up. America is about freedom. You know, I used to say this in a theological sense. I used to say that if you sacrifice sound doctrine, biblical sound doctrine for unity, eventually you'll have neither. And I can say this, that if you sacrifice security, if you sacrifice, if you sacrifice for security, if you sacrifice, oh, hang on one second here. I had a thought, I think I might have written it down, but I'm losing it.
That's okay. Yeah, no, and I think it was something that was said by,
There it is.
oh, who is it? Is it Ben Franklin that said that?
It is. If you sacrifice security for freedom, that's the quote. If you
Okay.
sacrifice security for freedom, you'll have neither. That was Ben Franklin. That's
Yeah.
right.
Amen.
Good quote.
You know what though? I this is interesting because, and me and Seth have talked about this a bunch of times. Brother Ed, I feel a lot of people don't mind it. Don't mind the staying in. Don't mind the extra $600 a week from the federal government. And I always bring up this point, is that the poverty-stricken people of America are, I don't want to say for the most part, but for a large portion of them, are overweight or have free cell phones. And I'm not getting racial. I'm not doing anything like that. And I really mean that.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, you better look out, man. You're going to get us in trouble. Knock it off.
Right. We live in a country where the poverty-stricken people could be kings in other nations.
Yeah.
And people are already primed up for the government just handing over a check, handing over a cell phone, handing over food.
Yeah, and that leads to a problem, and it leads to multiple problems. But Proverbs chapter 22, verse 7 says, "The rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender."
Right.
We as a nation, let alone individuals, we as a nation are a debtor nation.
Yeah, what is the national debt at this point, Brother Ed? Do you know?
Well, I'm not sure if they've totaled it lately with all this additional spending, which had not been funded in any way. So using an older figure perhaps, but fairly recent, 24 to 25, get the number, $1 trillion.
I can't get that number. That's a number that's beyond me.
Well, look at it this way. That's like, let's say you spent $1 million a day. $1 million is still a lot of money to most of us. $1 million
Oh, yeah.
money. Let's say that you spent $1 million a day. You could spend $1 million a day for 24 million years.
Wow.
66,000 years. $1 million a day. So it's a big number, which again is kind of hard. I hope I did my math right. I think I did.
Yeah, 66,000 years,
Yeah.
spending $1 million a day.
Yeah, so that's a big number. So we're heading, I feel that's why I said when you asked me the first question, I believe we're on the runway towards exactly what we read about in the book of Genesis. We're heading for a period of time with similar problems that we had in Genesis chapter number 47, but far worse when we consider the tribulation and what's to come, far worse. So we're just on the runway now.
Right, and I suspect that the people are going to have the same attitude that they had thousands of years ago, and that's somebody give us something to eat.
That's it.
Yeah.
I'll stand in this line. I'll face this direction. I'll sit on my head. I will chant this mantra. You just tell me what I got to do. I'll be here. Give me the food.
Yeah, as Pastor Joe said, yeah, just take my identity. Do whatever you have to do. I need to eat, and you can understand the fear in people.
Right.
You have to eat or you die. Yeah. But yeah, we are being pushed more and more towards that time in that we read about in Genesis, or I'm sorry, in Revelation, and Revelation chapter number 13, where we see the rise of a man who's going to come on the scene and seem to have answers to these types of problems. But he is going to be at the end of the day, he's going to be a traitor to all of humanity. And that man we know is who? We know him as what?
The beast.
The beast, the Antichrist. He goes by many names: the man of sin, that wicked, the son of perdition. He has a lot of names in the Bible. God has not concealed him, even though we don't know his full identity yet today. God has not concealed him. He's told us much about him. He told us much about the type of government that he would begin to head up. And we are primed for it because we are a debtor society. We are a debtor world, and we have been enslaved, as the Bible says, by our debt. It really is a Luciferian or Lucifer plot to bring all of humanity into a form of slavery by the money that is owed by all these nations, including us, unfortunately.
Well, speaking of that money, then, because I know you and I have had a number of conversations regarding this. In particular, I guess globally, but what about even in America? What are the potential results of this? It seems to be every time we get ourselves in financial trouble, we just print money.
Yeah,
it seems to always be the solution, print money. But we haven't had our dollar hasn't been backed by silver or gold since the early 1900s. Isn't that correct? Since before the Fed?
Yeah, and we were taken off. Well, we were actually taken off the gold standard by Richard Nixon. I think that was 1971 or somewhere around there. But there has been a push towards electronic type funding. The Bible kind of frames it in biblical terms cashless, but we're being pushed in that way like never before. It's going to be a universal kind of system in some manner that'll be used to further enslave mankind during the tribulation. And our money is what I would call fiat money. It's backed by nothing. And the better news is it's created out of nothing. So the only thing that keeps that society moving with money, because you need money to transact, there's no doubt, is people's faith and confidence and belief in it. Now, how long is that going to go on?
That's interesting that you use faith, because fiat and faith are only a couple letters different.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And recently, you guys got your Bible, turn over to Revelation chapter 13 for a second. We started mentioning this man called the Beast, Antichrist, beast here in the context of Revelation 13, and verse number 16. It tells us the kind of direction that we're heading as a world. And it says, and he, this is the false prophet, right? Isn't it false prophet here?
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
He causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, that pretty much covers everybody, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666.
Yeah.
Many people know, the old 666. You find them in old horror movies and things like that. This is where it comes from. It comes from the Bible. And what you see here is it's a push towards. It will be a push towards a cashless form of transacting. Any of you guys heard recently that all of a sudden with this COVID-19 going on, this Wuhan virus, that we really shouldn't even use paper dollars anymore?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
We're talking about it at work, brother. Big time. Cashless world. Yep.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? So, now we shouldn't really use money. And I understand, look, paper money is not the most efficient way of transacting business. In business, as I was in the finance side of things, we didn't have a lot of dollar bills pass through. Everything was electronic in one form or another. Electronic payroll and electronic payments. With cash, how would you make a purchase over the internet from buying something from Europe?
Sure.
So we're all used to it. I mean, we all have credit cards and Apple Pay, and I don't know what else, other kinds of things.
Yeah.
You guys know some of the other forms of transactions.
I'm a little behind in the times. I'm still using a credit card, but.
Well, I use a credit card too, but if I go
Right.
to my local grocery store, I'll see people put their phone up and buying with probably Apple Pay or some other pay device.
Yeah.
And this is the kind of thing, but on a grander scale and even a more enslaving manner that we just read about here.
Ed, I got a question for you.
Sure.
And just because I don't know much of, the gold standard and all that. So if everything is by faith or whatever, by trusting this government, what happened to, or what is going on with all of the gold that was representing money?
Yeah. Well, the gold is still there, obviously. Gold doesn't disappear.
Right.
Sovereign nations do still own gold because there are those who do still understand that the golden rule, he who has the gold rules.
Right.
I think that's the golden rule.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But so the gold is still around, but we used to have money. I don't know if I have an old $20 bill it's 70 years old. And it says on that this money is legal tender, because at the time it was backed by gold, which is gold and silver is our constitutional money.
Right.
Still is, as far as I know. They haven't changed that in the Constitution. Now,
Wait a minute. What does the Constitution mean anymore?
well, that's true.
That doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, well, it hasn't meant a whole lot since Abraham Lincoln. But anyway, we digress.
Right.
But it is being trampled on. Even our rights are being trampled on right now. So if you look at a new dollar bill, though, right prominently at the top, it says Federal Reserve Note.
Right.
And it used to say, though they've changed it, now it says that this money is good for all, legal debts. It used to say, believe it or not that long ago, this was redeemable for lawful money. Now, if it's redeemable for lawful money, what does it make the thing in your hand? Lawful.
Oh, now that's interesting.
That is, yeah.
Well, they changed that. They took that off the bills in recent years, and now it says Federal Reserve Note, which is interesting. That it brings in the Federal Reserve.
Right.
But we are heading towards this world economy and this time when there will be cashless transactions. It's already done on an international basis with for instance, like the International Monetary Fund. Have you guys heard of the International Monetary?
Yeah, no, I was going to ask you about that. Why don't we segue there?
Sure. Well, the International Monetary Fund, it's a group of countries is what it is. It was created a global electronic currencies, and I'll describe that in a moment. But it was actually, the organization was created in 1944, so around the time of the war. It was at the UN Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire. and 44 countries came together and they formed this International Monetary Fund. Today, it represents 189 countries.
Wow.
So it's quite extensive. And the stated mission of the international, now notice again, when we were reading in the Bible, it talked about all people having to have a mark. All, that's international. And it was not going to be cash anymore. It was going to be cashless. And the mission of the International Monetary Fund, among other things, was to ensure the stability of international monetary systems, the system of exchange rates, if you will, between different countries. So every country has a different standard of living, and so our dollar is not the same value as a Mexican peso, for instance, to use some local.
Right.
So we had to find a way, or they had to find a way to equalize things if they wanted to do it, if anyone wanted to do international trade and international lending. And so they created a global electronic, notice, not cash, electronic. It's an artificial currency. They call them SDRs, or special drawing rights. That was done in 1969. And I don't know if you guys have heard of that or not, the SDRs.
I have not heard of that. That's why I am not in finances.
I get it. So the SDRs, it's a basket of various currencies used for global accounting purposes. And it represents a claim to currency by the 189 members. As a matter of fact, again, seeing the global nature of it, there's some countries are already using the SDRs as a means to peg their own currencies, like they used to do, like people used to do with gold. Like we used to do with gold, we would peg our currency to the amount of gold. So if we had an ounce of gold, we could have so many dollars. Well, they're doing that with the SDRs, which means that, again, on a national basis, we have an international means of transactions electronically already called SDRs. And an SDR is an international reserve asset. A reserve asset is important because the dollar had been a reserve asset for so many years. It is what keeps things stable, and it is what people turn to when there are crises. And the IMF SDRs are an international reserve asset, if you will.
Okay.
So that's what's kind of important about that. And, the International Monetary Funds does other things too. Through the World Bank, they lend to other countries and things like that, some of the quote unquote third world countries, because the idea is this. We have some rich countries, some poor countries. We got to make the rich countries a little poorer. We got to make the poor countries a little richer. So we are taking money from richer companies and countries and moving it in form of loans to these poorer countries, because the end goal is everybody the same.
Yeah.
It's going to be a worldwide form of socialism.
Right. That's it. I mean, that's what I was just thinking. Instead of socialism on a national level, it's socialism on a global level.
Yes.
Right.
What that ultimately, just like what socialism does to the individual, is it strips them of their freedom.
Yes.
And their right to be a person and to live and to breathe and to work for themselves and to enjoy the fruit of their own labor. And I would see this then, wouldn't this put the future of, let's say, the United States sovereignty at risk?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great question, great thought. Our sovereignty, because again, if you think about what we read in Proverbs, it says that the borrower is servant to the lender. And there's a very nefarious Luciferian lender involved in all this. But our sovereignty, like anybody else's, will become as we're a debtor nation, we become slaves. And this has been in action for many, many years. I mean, think about some of our founding fathers. Thomas Jefferson, remember him? I mean, all the way back there.
I met him once, but that was a long time ago. So
good. I've never met him, but I hear he's a nice guy.
Yeah.
Well, Thomas Jefferson, who was not a Christian, but he was a brilliant man. He was a brilliant statesman. Let's put it that way. And he fought against the formation of central banks. And he had an adversary by the name of Alexander Hamilton.
Oh, hey, there's an Alexander. That name never is good in the Bible, right?
Isn't that something? Alexander.
Yeah.
I never thought about that. And Hamilton, isn't that the play that a lot of the socialists love to go see?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Hamilton. Yeah, same guy. Well, so, back at that time, I mean, Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson were feuding against each other. Alexander Hamilton was acting as an agent for European central bankers, and he was trying to create an American central bank in a plot that involved a man by the name of James Rothschild.
Oh, okay. So now here we're going. Now
Yeah.
we're heading down the conspiratorial, I don't know, the rabbit hole of conspiracy theory.
Yes.
It's a good place for us to stop here, and then we'll segue into our next episode. We're running out of time here anyhow, so we're just going to kind of leave this as a cliffhanger for the next episode. And next week, where we'll begin to discuss, I want to ask you a question about Jekyll Island and maybe some of the things that are going into the microchips and the different areas that we could be heading towards with the mark of the beast.
Look forward to it.
Pastor Ed, thank you, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Pastors, we'll see you.
All righty.